Oh my God. Janine is such an idiot. I would be so embarrassed if I were that stupid. Wouldn't you? These kinds of rhetorical questions were asked by my boss about me, not only in front of me, but in front of my colleagues, people who were accountable to me, and even clients. Have you ever had a boss who made you feel like less than you knew yourself to be? Thank you. Have you ever had a boss that made you feel isolated or belittled or afraid? Maybe you were just dealing with constant headaches and perpetual nausea. Thank you. People wondered aloud to me why I was so often the one targeted. I had no idea. I only knew two things. There was nothing that I could do about it because the retaliation would be so much worse than the bullying, and it was taking a serious toll on me. But like the proverbial frog in the pot of boiling water, it took me 8 years to do anything about it. By the time I got into action, I thought an antidepressant would be enough to help me manage my stress. Instead, my doctor sent me out on immediate medical leave to deal with severe depression and adrenal burnout. These scenarios are far too common in our workplaces, as we all just showed by raising our hands. And there is a revolution, a secret revolution, happening in the workplace to prevent these kinds of experiences from defining the future of work. Much has been said about the millennial and Gen Z generations, the Zoomers, many of whom are here in the audience today. As generations, you have been maligned and characterized as being entitled or lacking work ethic. And like all generational stereotypes, there's a little truth in that, mixed with a whole lot of exaggeration. We were all young once, and one of the great things about being young is that we sometimes have this yet unfounded sense of self, which can come off as entitled or cocky. I'm going to be making some generational generalizations. I'm going to be talking about the boomers and Xers on the one hand, and the millennials and Zoomers on the other. Each generation has about 70 million people in it. And so within every generalization, there will be many exceptions. And the things that I'm going to be talking about are well documented, not only by my own research, but by the research of many people smarter than I. And these are well founded. So one of the things that is true in general about the millennial and Zoomer generations is that y'all have a very low tolerance for toxic behavior and workplace bullying. Previous generations, including mine, we were told to put our heads down, do the work, and never, ever quit your job without a new one lined up. These younger generations who were raised by my generation, right? Y'all were often praised for your participation. You were told that you could do or be anything. And as a result, imbued with a very strong sense of self. This is putting pressure on the workforce to have workplace cultures that are more humanistic, where people's value isn't just determined by the work that they produce, but also by the effort that they make. And as human beings, not just as producers of work. Here's the problem. Many leaders are failing to either see or understand the impact of this. Let's go back for a second to the millennials and the Zoomers. These are not kids anymore. The oldest millennial is 45. The oldest Zoomer is 30. The millennials are now the largest percentage of the workforce. And there are now more Zoomers working than there are boomers working. Check this out. According to a new report published in the Economic Times, 52% of the world is now under 30. So this idea that these older leaders can ignore the needs of younger workers, honestly, is nonsense. But that's the problem. I'm going to give you a couple examples of how this has played out recently. I was working last fall with a group of about 50 CEOs, and the conversation turned to this pressure being put on the workplace and this organizational culture shift that is being pushed for by these younger generations, and whether or not it was permanent. The older, predominantly white, male CEOs were adamant that this was a phase and things would return to business as usual soon enough. I am working with a law firm right now, and the senior partners were expressing frustration with the younger associates' needs for clear communication and expectations, for constructive feedback, for help with designing a career path for themselves, and empathy for their personal lives. No one gave me that when I was coming up, they argued. I get it, nobody handed me a career roadmap or cared about my personal life or emotional health either. But let's tell the truth here. I would have loved it if they did. And I wasn't willing to quit my job if I didn't get it. And that is the fundamental difference. These younger generations have been imbued by us, right? With this strong sense of who they are and the fact that their voices matter. And so they get into a workplace that isn't valuing their voice, and they are quick to leave. News articles, however, are full of things like this, talking about how younger generations' neediness is to blame for their demands. Again, I say nonsense. The reality is that every generation has wanted work that matters, to feel seen, heard, and valued, to work for an organization whose values align with theirs. The difference is, before these generations, we weren't willing to leave our jobs, right? And so these generations get accused of being unwilling and unable to handle the stress. That's not it at all. They're not unwilling. They're not unable. They could do it. They just choose not to. And here's the really big problem. So you may have heard about the Great Resignation, right? This started during COVID. It was about people voluntarily quitting their jobs, not retiring, not being fired, not being downsized, choosing to walk out the door. The average tenure of Millennial and Gen Zers in the workplace is still only 3 years. And so if we don't get a handle on this, the boomers and the Xers, the leaders who are retiring, have no one to pass that institutional knowledge on to. Let's talk for a second about institutional knowledge. It's about a number of different things, but one of the things that it is keyly about, if that's a word, right, is it is about being able to innovate effectively with the end user in mind. In order to be able to do that, you have to have been around in an organization long enough to really understand your users, to have a deep knowledge of your customers. So this information is often held by older, more tenured workers. If we don't keep our younger workers engaged and in our organizations, we have no possibility to pass that information along. Toxic work culture is the driver of what is now called the Great Resignation and continued high levels of people voluntarily quitting their jobs. According to a new report that came out in LinkedIn, 50% of the world and 85% of workers in the United States are considering quitting their jobs in 2025. 85%, right? So this isn't just a millennial and Zoomer issue. This is a worker issue. A new report that just came out by the American Psychological Association's Work in America survey in 2023 determined that 92% of employees say that it is important to them to work for an organization that values their mental health and psychological well-being. So again, this isn't the Zoomers and the millennials who are just being demanding. This is a human issue. Our millennials and Zoomers are just voting with their feet out the door when we refuse to comply. I want to talk for a minute about leadership. Sometimes we have this idea that leadership is something that is conferred, right? Thou is now a leader. It is something that is earned. Again, I say nonsense. Leadership is a decision that anyone can make in an organization, regardless of your position in the organization, your title, your rank. Leadership is something that we step into. It's about how we show up. And none of us leaders can afford to be playing by that old business as usual playbook. So what do? We now get to step into our leadership. We get to start creating organizations where people feel seen, heard, and belong. Because those are the greatest human needs, the need for connection, the need for belonging. And the reality is, because of all of our devices and all of the things in our lives, we are more disconnected now than we ever have been. And people are looking to the workplace for the first time ever for that to be where they create belonging. The workplace was not set up for y'all to belong there, but we get to create that now because we are living in a whole new world. So how do we go about this? It starts with self-awareness. Self-awareness is about understanding yourself. It's about understanding your strengths, your weaknesses or challenges or areas of opportunity. It's about understanding your triggers and your motivations. And it's about understanding how other people perceive those in you, right? It's not just about getting yourself. It's also about understanding how you actually show up, because sometimes we have blind spots about that. The next thing is psychological safety. Psychological safety is about creating spaces in which people can be themselves, be heard, raise their hands, have questions about things, put their ideas forward without fear of retaliation. When we create these workplaces, people thrive. The last piece of the puzzle is about leadership. Leaders get to lead with empathy. We get to create a whole new style of leaders where we reframe failure for our people because we know that to make mistakes is human, and it's how we learn and innovate. So I challenge you to be part of the revolution, to create organizations where people have the experience of being valued, not just for their own sake, but also because people are the key to profits, right? And create organizations where what we are creating is not just a profit-driven machine, but also a force for good, for the environment, for our planet and its people. The future of leadership is in your hands. Thank you.